The first time David hit me, we were celebrating our 1-year anniversary. I remember how the champagne tasted, Dom Perignon, $400 a bottle, and how the crystal flute shattered against the imported Italian marble when it fell from my hand. I remember the exact shade of crimson that bloomed across my cheekbone, matching the Louboutins he'd gifted me earlier that evening. "Look what you made me do, Sarah," he whispered, his voice strangely calm as he straightened his custom Tom Ford jacket. "Now we'll have to cancel brunch with Mother tomorrow." David Vance, heir to the Vance Pharmaceuticals empire, darling of Boston's elite social circles, and the man whose ring I'd worn for exactly 365 days, helped me clean my face with imported Swiss cotton towels. His hands were gentle now, apologetic. They always were, after. "I'm sorry, baby. You know how I get when you mention children. We've talked about this." "Not yet. Mother needs me focused on the company." I nodded, already learning the choreography of our dance, the strike, the apology, the excuse, the forgiveness. "It won't happen again," he promised, pressing his lips to my temple. "This isn't me. You know that, right? It's the pressure, the board meeting, Mother's expectations." I believed him because I wanted to, because the alternative, that I'd married a monster masquerading as a prince, was unthinkable. That night, he made love to me with such tenderness that I convinced myself it had been an anomaly, a momentary crack in his otherwise perfect facade. It wasn't. For 3 years, I became an expert at hiding bruises. I learned which foundation covered the purple shadows beneath my eyes, and which designer sunglasses concealed the worst of the damage. I discovered that long sleeves could hide fingerprints on wrists, and high-necked blouses masked the evidence of passion gone too far. To the world, we were perfect. David Vance and his beautiful wife, living in our Beacon Hill mansion with its manicured gardens and live-in staff who were paid well enough to keep their eyes down and their mouths shut. We hosted charity galas where Boston's elite sipped champagne and praised my impeccable taste. We summered in the Hamptons and wintered in Aspen. We donated to the right causes and had our photos taken with the right people. And every few weeks, when the pressure became too much or I said the wrong thing or looked at him the wrong way, David would remind me of my place. "No one would believe you," he'd say afterward, his Harvard-educated voice reasonable and calm. "You're nothing without the Vance name. You're from nowhere, Sarah. Remember that." He was right about my origins. I'd grown up in a small Pennsylvania town, worked my way through community college, and landed a job as an event coordinator at the Four Seasons in Boston, where I'd met David at a pharmaceutical industry gala. He'd been charming, attentive, seemingly perfect. When he proposed after 6 months, it felt like a fairy tale. The fairy tale ended on our anniversary, but the story, our story, continued. I stayed because I was afraid, because I had nowhere to go, because leaving meant admitting I'd failed, and most of all, because of Eleanor. Eleanor Vance, David's mother and CEO of Vance Pharmaceuticals, was a force of nature. Widowed young, she'd taken her husband's modest company and transformed it into a pharmaceutical giant through sheer will and ruthless business acumen. She'd raised David to be her heir, sending him to the right schools, introducing him to the right people, grooming him to eventually take her place. She terrified me. Every Sunday we had dinner at her Brookline estate, a sprawling Tudor mansion filled with old money and older secrets. She would watch me with calculating eyes as she asked about grandchildren, charity commitments, social connections. The message was clear. I was a necessary accessory for her son, expected to play my part without complaint. "Eleanor was asking about that women's hospital fundraiser again," David said one evening as we dressed for another society event. "You'll chair the committee this year." It wasn't a question. Nothing ever was with the Vances. "David, I don't think I can. I've already committed to the Children's Museum Gala and—" His hand caught my wrist, twisting until I gasped. "Mother expects it, Sarah. Don't disappoint her. Don't disappoint me." I nodded, swallowing the pain along with my objections. This was my life now, existing in the narrow space between David's rage and Eleanor's expectations. But even the most carefully constructed facades eventually crack. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were when Maria, our housekeeper, changed the fresh flowers throughout the house. Lilies in the foyer, roses in the dining room, orchids in the master suite. I'd been avoiding David since the previous night when a dinner with his colleagues had ended with my head slammed against our bedroom wall after I'd laughed too loudly at another man's joke. The pain behind my ear had grown worse overnight, a persistent throbbing ache that made the room spin when I moved too quickly. But I had obligations. A lunch meeting with Eleanor to discuss the hospital fundraiser I'd unwillingly agreed to chair. Eleanor had suggested meeting at our home, rather than her usual preferred venue, the Boston Harbor Hotel. "I need to discuss some sensitive company matters with David afterward," she'd explained over the phone. "It's more discreet." I spent the morning preparing, instructing the chef on Eleanor's preferences, arranging flowers from our greenhouse, setting out the Limoges china she'd given us as a wedding gift. Everything had to be perfect. Eleanor accepted nothing less. She arrived precisely at noon, dressed in a perfectly tailored Chanel suit, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. At 72, Eleanor Vance was still beautiful in that intimidating, patrician way that old Boston money often cultivates. "Sarah," she said, air-kissing my cheeks. "You look tired. Are you getting enough sleep?" Her eyes, the same piercing blue as David's, scanned my face, cataloging every flaw. I'd applied extra concealer that morning, but Eleanor missed nothing. "Just busy with the hospital committee," I lied smoothly. "So many details to coordinate." She nodded, seemingly satisfied, and followed me to the sunroom where lunch was served. For an hour, we discussed guest lists and auction items, potential donors and press coverage. I took careful notes in the Smithson leather notebook David had given me for Christmas, ignoring the way the sunlight sent sharp needles of pain through my skull. "The governor has confirmed," Eleanor was saying, "but we'll need to ensure his wife is seated away from the Lowells. There was that unfortunate business last year with their daughter and the governor's son." Her voice seemed to come from farther and farther away. The pain behind my ear pulsed in time with my heartbeat, growing until it consumed everything. The room tilted sideways. I tried to stand, to excuse myself, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. "Sarah?" Eleanor's voice sounded concerned, but that couldn't be right. Eleanor Vance didn't concern herself with anyone's welfare but her own, and David's. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Eleanor's face, those Vance blue eyes widening in shock as I collapsed onto her designer shoes. And then, nothing. I awoke to the steady beep of hospital monitors and the antiseptic smell that no amount of luxury could disguise. Massachusetts General Hospital's VIP suite. I recognized it from when David had his appendix removed last year. "She's awake," a nurse said, and suddenly Eleanor was there, standing at the foot of my bed. "What happened?" I asked, my mouth dry, my voice a rasp. "You collapsed," Eleanor replied, her tone clipped and professional. "The doctors found a subdural hematoma, bleeding between your brain and skull. They performed emergency surgery." My hand flew to my head, finding bandages where my hair should be. "Don't worry," Eleanor said, misinterpreting my gesture. "They only shaved a small portion. It can be easily covered once the sutures heal." Of course, that would be her concern. Appearances. "Where's David?" I asked, though I already knew. If I was here, with bandages and monitors, then the doctors had questions. Questions David wouldn't want to answer. "Business emergency in New York," Eleanor said smoothly. "I called him when you collapsed. He's flying back tonight." A lie, but a convenient one. I nodded, then winced at the pain the movement caused. "The doctor will be in shortly," Eleanor continued. "They wanted to speak with you once you were awake." She paused, studying me with those calculating eyes. "They had some concerns about your other injuries." My heart stuttered. The bruises, the partially healed fractures, the evidence of 3 years of David's love. "I'm clumsy," I whispered, the familiar excuse tasting like ashes on my tongue. "Always have been." Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't identify. "The doctors mentioned that your injuries are consistent with physical abuse," she said, her voice so neutral it could have been discussing the weather. "I assured them that was impossible. David would never—" She trailed off, watching my face, waiting for me to confirm the lie we both knew I was expected to tell. But something had changed. Maybe it was the surgery, the brushing against death, or simply the accumulated weight of 3 years of fear and pain. Whatever the reason, I couldn't form the words. Eleanor moved closer, lowering her voice. "Sarah, these kinds of accusations could damage David's reputation, the company's reputation, our family's reputation. You understand that, don't you? Family, as if I had ever truly been part of the Vance family." "I fell," I said finally, the words hollow. "Multiple times. I'm clumsy." Relief flickered across Eleanor's face. Yes, exactly. We'll need to be more careful about your condition. Perhaps some balance therapy. Before I could respond, the door opened, and a doctor entered, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a clipboard. Mrs. Vance, glad to see you're awake. I'm Dr. Chen. She glanced at Eleanor. Would you prefer to speak privately? Anything you need to say can be said in front of my mother-in-law, I replied, watching Eleanor's face. She nodded approvingly. Dr. Chen looked between us, something like suspicion crossing her features. Very well. Mrs. Vance, you suffered a significant head trauma that caused bleeding around your brain. We've successfully evacuated the hematoma, but you'll need to be monitored closely. I'm more concerned, however, about your other injuries. She flipped through her clipboard. You have 3 partially healed rib fractures, a recently healed wrist fracture that was never properly set, and extensive bruising in various stages of healing across your torso, arms, and thighs. Eleanor's face remained impassive, a perfect mask of Boston Brahmin composure. As I told the nurses, I said, I'm extremely clumsy. Always have been. Ask my husband. Dr. Chen's expression made it clear she didn't believe me. Mrs. Vance, these injuries are consistent with my clumsiness, I interrupted firmly. Nothing more. Dr. Chen held my gaze for a long moment before sighing. I'm required by law to report suspected domestic abuse, Mrs. Vance. Eleanor stepped forward. Doctor, I can assure you that my son would never— With all due respect, Mrs. Vance, Dr. Chen cut in. I need to hear from my patient. She turned back to me. Sarah, if you're in danger, we can help you. There are resources, protections. I'm not in danger, I said. The lie so practiced it almost sounded true. I appreciate your concern, but it's misplaced. Dr. Chen's disappointment was palpable, but she nodded. I'll have the nurse bring you pain medication. We'll keep you under observation for at least 48 hours. If you change your mind about anything, just press the call button. After she left, Eleanor remained silent, studying me with those calculating eyes. Thank you, she said finally. That could have been uncomfortable. I know my place, I replied, my voice flat. Something flickered across Eleanor's face. Was it guilt? Impossible. Eleanor Vance didn't feel guilt. I should go, she said abruptly. David will need to be briefed when he returns from New York. I'll have your assistant bring some things from home. I didn't bother correcting her. I didn't have an assistant. Maria, our housekeeper, would be sent with a suitcase of carefully selected clothes that covered every inch of revealing skin. As Eleanor gathered her things, a nurse entered with medication. Time for your pain relief, Mrs. Vance, she said cheerfully, inserting something into my IV line. Eleanor paused at the door. Your family, Sarah, she said, as if reading my earlier thoughts. We take care of our own. As the medication pulled me toward merciful oblivion, I wondered exactly what taking care of our own meant to the Vances. Protection or silencing? For the first time in 3 years, a dangerous thought took root in my mind. What if I didn't want to be taken care of anymore? David arrived the next morning, his face a perfect mask of concern, carrying an obscene arrangement of roses and my favorite Hermes scarf. Sweetheart, he murmured, kissing my forehead carefully, mindful of the bandages. I came as soon as I could. The Tokyo deal. Another lie. There was no Tokyo deal, but I smiled weakly and accepted the gifts, playing my part in our carefully choreographed dance. The doctors say you'll make a full recovery, he continued, taking my hand. His thumb brushed over my knuckles. Gentle now. Always gentle in public. Mother told me about their questions. His eyes, those Vance blue eyes, hardened slightly. A warning I'd learned to read years ago. I told them I'm clumsy, I said quietly. Always have been. The tension in his shoulders eased. Good. That's good. We don't need that kind of attention, especially with the Novartis acquisition on the horizon. Always the company. Always appearances. Nothing else mattered in David's world, not even the fact that he'd nearly killed his wife. When can I take you home? He asked, already planning, already moving forward, as if this were just another inconvenience to manage. Tomorrow, maybe, I replied. Dr. Chen wants to monitor me. His jaw tightened at the mention of Dr. Chen. Mother mentioned her. Overzealous. We should consider having you transferred to Boston Memorial. Dr. Whitman there is a family friend. A family friend who wouldn't ask uncomfortable questions. Who would look the other way? Who would protect the Vance name above all else? I'm comfortable here, I said, surprising myself with the small rebellion. David's eyes narrowed, but a nurse chose that moment to enter the room, saving me from his response. "Time to check your vitals, Mrs. Vance," she said brightly. David stood, smoothing his impeccable suit. "I'll let you rest. I have meetings this afternoon, but I'll return this evening." He kissed my cheek, his lips cold against my skin. "Remember, Sarah, you're a Vance now. We handle our affairs privately." After he left, I stared at the ceiling, counting the acoustic tiles, thinking about what it meant to be a Vance. Private, powerful, protected. But who was protecting me? Dr. Chen returned that afternoon, checking my pupils, my reflexes, my healing incision. "Your recovery is progressing well," she said, making notes on her tablet, physically at least. I said nothing, watching her efficient movements. "Mrs. Vance, Sarah," she said finally, meeting my eyes. "I've been doing this for 25 years. I know the difference between accidental injuries and other kinds." I looked away. "I told you. I know what you told me," she interrupted gently. "And I know why you told me that. I'm not here to judge you or force you to say anything you're not ready to say. I just want you to know that when you are ready, there are people who will help you." She placed a business card on my bedside table. "This appears to be a card for a neurologist for follow-up care. It is that, but it's also the contact information for a domestic violence advocate who works with our hospital. If you call the number and ask for Dr. Sullivan's new patient consultation, you'll be connected to someone who can help." I stared at the card, feeling a strange vertigo that had nothing to do with my head injury. "I can't," I whispered. Dr. Chen's expression was kind but firm. "The next time you might not make it to the hospital, Sarah." After she left, I lay in the darkening room, Dr. Chen's card burning a hole in my consciousness. I thought of David's rage, of Eleanor's cold calculations, of the life I'd been living, a beautiful prison with gilded bars. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a different life, a life without fear, without bruises, without lies. But how? David would never let me go. The Vances protected their own, from outsiders and from themselves. As night fell, a plan began to form in my mind. Not escape, not yet, but something else, something that might give me leverage, protection. If I couldn't leave the Vances, perhaps I could beat them at their own game. I returned home 3 days later to a house full of flowers and a husband walking on eggshells. David was solicitous, gentle, apologetic in that particular way he always was after the worst episodes. For 2 weeks, he didn't raise his voice, didn't drink too much, didn't let his carefully manicured nails dig into my skin when he held my arm in public. "You need to rest," he insisted, arranging for a private nurse to check on me daily. "The company can wait," but it couldn't. Not really. Not with the Novartis acquisition looming, the deal that would cement Vance Pharmaceuticals as a global powerhouse and David's position as his mother's true successor. Eleanor called daily, ostensibly to check on my recovery, but really to ensure David remained focused on work despite his distraction. Mother's hosting a dinner next Friday for the Novartis executives," David informed me over breakfast one morning. "She expects us both to attend." I looked up from my untouched toast. "The doctor said I should avoid stressful situations for at least a month." David's smile tightened. "It's just dinner, Sarah. You'll take a Xanax, wear something that covers the surgical site, and be the charming hostess we both know you can be." His tone left no room for argument. "This deal is everything to Mother, to our family, as if I had ever been anything more than window dressing to the Vance dynasty." But I nodded, acquiescing as I always did. "Of course. I'll have Vera find something appropriate." Vera, my personal shopper, who never questioned why I suddenly needed so many high-necked blouses and long-sleeved dresses. David's smile warmed, genuine relief replacing the warning in his eyes. "Perfect. I'll have the car ready at 7. After he left for the office, I sat in our sunlit breakfast nook, listening to the housekeeper moving discreetly through the rooms, and contemplated my next move. During my hospital stay, I'd made a decision. Not to leave, not yet, but to protect myself, to gather insurance. Information was power, and the Vances had built their empire on knowing things others didn't. It was time I played by their rules. I began with small steps. While recuperating, I started volunteering remotely for the hospital fundraiser, insisting on handling email correspondence myself rather than delegating to the committee assistant. This gave me access to Eleanor's work schedule, her meetings, her priorities. I learned when she was distracted by business concerns, and when her attention might turn to more personal matters. I also befriended Melissa, Eleanor's personal assistant, during committee meetings. Melissa, overworked, underpaid, and underappreciated, was a wealth of information about Eleanor's habits, her calendar, her private concerns. A few sympathetic lunches and strategically shared confidences about the pressures of Vance family expectations, and Melissa began to see me as an ally, rather than just the boss's daughter-in-law. Mrs. Vance has been obsessed with the Novartis deal, Melissa confided over salads at an upscale Boston eatery. She's been having private meetings that don't appear on her official calendar. Not even Mr. David knows about them. I raised an eyebrow, projecting casual interest rather than the intense focus I felt. Oh? That's unusual. Eleanor typically keeps David in the loop on everything. Melissa leaned forward, lowering her voice. That's just it. I think she might be planning to delay his promotion to CEO. The board was supposed to vote next quarter, but she's pushing it back another year. The information was a gold nugget. David's greatest fear was that his mother would never relinquish control, that the promises of succession were just that, promises meant to keep him in line, working toward a future that would always remain just out of reach. That would devastate him, I said carefully. He's been working toward this his entire life. Melissa nodded. I probably shouldn't be saying anything, but your family, and you've been so kind to me. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand, ignoring the twinge of guilt. I appreciate your trust, Melissa. This stays between us. By the time Friday's dinner arrived, I had accumulated a small arsenal of information, not just about Eleanor's plans for the company, but about certain financial irregularities I'd discovered while helping with the fundraiser's accounting. Nothing definitive, but enough to raise questions about whether all of Vance Pharmaceuticals' success had been achieved through strictly legal means. I dressed carefully for the dinner, selecting a high-necked sapphire gown that complemented my eyes and concealed the lingering bruises on my collarbone. The surgical site was still visible, a crescent of healing skin where they'd shaved my hair. But my stylist had worked wonders, creating an elegant updo that camouflaged the worst of it. Beautiful, David murmured as I descended the stairs. He was resplendent in a custom tuxedo, every inch the pharmaceutical prince. Mother will be pleased. The drive to Eleanor's Brookline estate was quiet, David rehearsing acquisition details under his breath while I stared out the window, mentally preparing for the evening ahead. Not just the social performance, but the first phase of my plan. Eleanor's home was lit up like a Christmas display, security discreetly positioned at the gates and along the curved driveway. The Novartis executives would be impressed by the show of wealth and power, exactly as Eleanor intended. Sarah, darling. Eleanor air-kissed my cheeks in the grand foyer, resplendent in burgundy Valentino and family diamonds. You look recovered. Well done. As if my healing had been a personal achievement, rather than a biological process. As if my survival had been a courtesy to the Vance family schedule. Thank you for including me tonight, I replied. The perfect daughter-in-law. I wouldn't have missed it. Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. Yes. Well, appearances matter. Particularly tonight. She turned to David. Conrad Bauer is having doubts about the research division integration. You'll need to reassure him. David's jaw tightened imperceptibly. I've prepared a detailed proposal. He'll come around. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. See that he does. This deal cannot falter at the finish line. The evening proceeded as these events always did. Expensive wine, perfectly prepared food, strategic conversations designed to strengthen alliances and overcome objections. I played my part flawlessly, charming the Novartis' wives while their husbands talked business with David and Eleanor. Your mother-in-law is formidable, Heidi Bauer, Conrad's wife, commented as we sipped champagne in Eleanor's conservatory during the post-dinner digestives. Conrad says she's the toughest negotiator he's ever faced. I smiled, the expression practiced to perfection. Eleanor built Vance Pharmaceuticals from a regional company to a global force. She doesn't believe in failure. And your husband will take over soon? Heidi asked, her German accent becoming more pronounced after several glasses of wine. Conrad mentioned a succession plan. A perfect opening. I leaned closer, lowering my voice conspiratorially. Between us, I believe Eleanor may be reconsidering the timeline. The board vote was scheduled for next quarter, but there are whispers it's been delayed. Heidi's eyes widened. But the acquisition agreement specifies David as the incoming CEO. Conrad was very clear that continuity of leadership was a condition. I'm sure it will be resolved, I said, feigning confidence I didn't feel. Eleanor always has a plan. I'd planted the seed. Now to water it. I excused myself, making my way to Eleanor's study under the pretense of finding the powder room. The dinner party was confined to the main floor, giving me precious minutes alone upstairs. Eleanor's study was unlocked, a surprising oversight, but perhaps she'd been distracted by the evening's importance. I slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind me. The room was pure Eleanor. Leather-bound books, antique desk, oil paintings of stern Vance ancestors judging from gilt frames. Her laptop sat closed on the desk, but I wasn't foolish enough to attempt accessing it. Instead, I moved to the filing cabinet behind her desk. The one Melissa had mentioned contained Eleanor's most sensitive documents. "She's old school," Melissa had confided. "Doesn't trust cloud storage for the really important stuff." The cabinet was locked, but I'd come prepared. Among my limited skills was the ability to pick simple locks, a remnant of a misspent adolescence before I'd reinvented myself as the perfect society wife. The lock yielded easily to my hairpin. Inside, files were meticulously organized by project, by year, by importance. I located the Novartis folder quickly, removing my phone to photograph key documents. I didn't have time to read everything, but I captured emails, contract drafts, and board meeting minutes. One document caught my eye, a memo from Eleanor to the Vance legal team discussing contingencies for DBVN 42 complications. DBVN 42. David had mentioned it in his sleep once, a new cancer drug that was central to the Novartis deal. What complications? I photographed the memo, then carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. As I closed the cabinet drawer, the study door opened. "Sarah." My heart stopped. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I was looking for the powder room," I said, slipping my phone into my clutch. "I must have taken a wrong turn." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, taking in my position near her desk. "The powder room is downstairs, adjacent to the conservatory. You've used it dozens of times." "The medication," I explained, touching my temple near the surgical site. "Sometimes I get confused. Spatial disorientation, Dr. Chen called it." Eleanor studied me for a long moment, her Vance blue eyes calculating. "David didn't mention ongoing cognitive issues." "I didn't tell him," I admitted, allowing genuine emotion to color my voice. "He has so much on his plate with the acquisition. I didn't want to worry him." Something flickered across Eleanor's face. Suspicion, certainly, but also something else. Something almost like respect. "Let me show you back downstairs," she said finally, holding the door wider. "We wouldn't want David to worry." As we descended the grand staircase, Eleanor's hand rested lightly on my arm, a gesture that could be mistaken for support, but felt more like restraint. "Family loyalty is everything to the Vances, Sarah," she said quietly. "Remember that." The warning was clear, but so was the implication. Eleanor suspected I was up to something, but couldn't prove it. For now, at least, I was safe. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of social niceties and strained smiles. David, oblivious to the undercurrents between his mother and wife, focused entirely on Conrad Bauer, working to secure the man's support for the acquisition. On the drive home, David was elated. "Bauer's on board. The deal is as good as done." He squeezed my knee, his touch possessive. "You were perfect tonight, Sarah. Absolutely perfect." I smiled, leaning my head against the cool window of the Bentley. "I'm glad." David misinterpreted my subdued response. "You're tired." The doctor said not to overdo it. His voice softened with practiced concern. "We'll have a quiet weekend. Just us." The thought of a weekend alone with David sent ice through my veins, but I nodded. "That sounds nice." Later, in the safety of our ensuite bathroom, I transferred the photographs from my phone to an encrypted cloud storage account I'd created using a prepaid credit card, one of several precautions I'd taken since leaving the hospital. The images weren't clear enough to read fully in the small previews, but I'd examine them properly when I had time alone. As I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Designer nightgown, perfectly styled hair, the fading yellowish bruises on my shoulders only partially concealed by expensive silk. For 3 years, I'd been the perfect Vance wife, accepting the bruises as the cost of luxury, of status, of survival. No more. David was already in bed, scrolling through emails on his tablet. He set it aside when I emerged from the bathroom, patting the space beside him. "Come here," he said, his voice gentle in the way it always was when he was pleased with me. "You deserve to be pampered after tonight." I slid between 1,000 thread count sheets, allowing him to pull me close, to stroke my hair, to murmur praise for my performance at dinner. I'd learned long ago that acquiescence was safer than resistance. Tonight, it served another purpose, maintaining the illusion while my real plans took shape. "I love you," David whispered as he turned out the light. "You know that, don't you? Everything I do for us, for our future." In the darkness, I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his arm across my waist, protective and possessive in equal measure. "I know," I replied, the lie bitter on my tongue. "I love you too." As David's breathing deepened into sleep, I stared at the ceiling, thinking of the documents I'd photographed, of Eleanor's warning, of the first tentative steps toward freedom. The game had begun, and this time, I intended to win. The photographs revealed more than I could have hoped. Eleanor's files contained evidence of clinical trial data manipulation for DBVN-42, Vance Pharmaceuticals' breakthrough cancer drug. Patients experiencing severe side effects had been quietly removed from the trials, their data expunged to maintain the drug's apparent safety profile. The FDA had been provided with sanitized results, and the Novartis deal hinged on DBVN-42's approval. It was, in a word, criminal. For a week, I contemplated my next move carefully. Direct confrontation would be suicide. The Vances had resources, connections, ways of making problems disappear. I needed leverage, protection, a way out that wouldn't end with me silenced permanently. The opportunity came unexpectedly, at the hospital fundraiser's final planning meeting. Eleanor had insisted on hosting at the Vance Pharmaceuticals headquarters, bringing committee members into the gleaming tower of glass and steel that dominated the Boston skyline. "Mrs. Vance, we're honored to have you back," Dr. Chen said as I entered the conference room. She'd been added to the committee at my suggestion. A respected physician would lend credibility to the event. "How's your recovery progressing?" "Very well, thank you," I replied, conscious of Eleanor watching our interaction from across the room. "The headaches are almost gone." Dr. Chen's eyes held mine a beat longer than necessary. "Glad to hear it. And the other issues we discussed?" "Managed," I said carefully. The meeting proceeded with discussions of auction items, table arrangements, and donor recognition. Throughout, I felt Eleanor's gaze on me, calculating, assessing. She'd been more attentive since finding me in her study. Not warmer, never that, but more aware of me as something other than David's decorative accessory. After the meeting, Eleanor stopped me as the others filed out. "A word, Sarah." I nodded, my pulse quickening. Had she discovered the missing files? The photographs? "You're Dr. Chen," Eleanor said once we were alone. "She seems invested in your case." I maintained a neutral expression. "She's thorough. It's why I suggested her for the committee. Donors appreciate medical expertise." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed. And your friendship?" "Purely professional," I assured her. "She's interested in the hospital's women's health initiatives, which aligns perfectly with our fundraising goals." Eleanor studied me for a long moment. "You've changed since your accident. Not a question, but an observation. One that required a response. Near-death experiences tend to provide perspective," I said carefully. A hint of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Indeed they do." She gathered her files, preparing to leave. "David mentioned you've been spending more time on committee work lately. Don't overtax yourself. Your health is important to the family." The family. Always the family. "I'll be careful," I promised, the double meaning of my words hidden beneath a perfect Vance wife smile. As Eleanor left, Dr. Chen reappeared, ostensibly to retrieve a forgotten notebook. "Are you free for coffee?" she asked once Eleanor was out of earshot. "I'd like to discuss your recovery more thoroughly." 20 minutes later, we sat in a small cafe 3 blocks from Vance headquarters, far enough to avoid casual observation by Eleanor's network of loyal employees. "You never called the number I gave you," Dr. Chen said without preamble. I stirred my latte, watching the pattern dissolve. "It's complicated." "Abuse usually is," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "But that doesn't mean there aren't solutions." I looked up, meeting her eyes. "What would you say if I told you I had evidence of criminal activity at Vance Pharmaceuticals?" Dr. Chen's expression shifted from concern to surprise. "I'd say that's an entirely different conversation." She paused. "One that might provide you with options. Hypothetically," I continued, lowering my voice, "if someone had evidence that a pharmaceutical company falsified clinical trial data for FDA approval, who would be the right person to take that information to?" Dr. Chen considered this carefully. Hypothetically, the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations would be interested, as would the Department of Justice. She leaned forward. But the person with such evidence would need protection. Whistleblower protection. Would that protection extend to other aspects of their life? Legal assistance if they needed to? Leave a dangerous situation? Understanding dawned in Dr. Chen's eyes. Yes, especially if the situations were connected. For the first time in 3 years, I felt a glimmer of real hope. I need time to gather more evidence, to make arrangements. Time might not be a luxury you have, Dr. Chen warned. If your husband realizes what you're doing, he won't, I said with more confidence than I felt. Not until it's too late. Dr. Chen slid a business card across the table, different from the one she'd given me at the hospital. This is a friend at the U.S. Attorney's Office. When you're ready. I tucked the card into my purse, already planning my next steps. Thank you. Don't wait too long, Sarah, she urged. The next injury might be fatal. I knew she was right. The clock was ticking, not just on my safety, but on the Novartis deal. Once completed, the evidence I had might be insufficient to bring down the Vances. I needed to act while the acquisition was still vulnerable, while Eleanor and David were distracted by business concerns. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 days after my coffee with Dr. Chen, David announced he would be traveling to Zurich for final negotiations with the Novartis executive team. Mother wanted to go herself, but the board insisted I take point, he said, his pride evident as he packed his luggage. They're finally seeing me as her true successor. If only he knew what Eleanor's files revealed about his future at the company. That's wonderful, I replied, playing my part. How long will you be gone? 4 days. Back Sunday night. He paused, studying me. Will you be all right alone? I could ask Mother to check on you. The thought of Eleanor checking on me sent ice through my veins. I'll be fine. The hospital fundraiser is Saturday. That will keep me busy. David nodded, satisfied. Perfect. Keep Mother distracted with that. She's been unsettled about the Zurich negotiations. Thinks I might miss something critical. Eleanor's doubt would work in my favor. She'd be focused on monitoring David from afar, not on her daughter-in-law's activities. After David left the following morning, I put my plan into motion. First, I contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office, using the number Dr. Chen had provided. A meeting was arranged for Friday, enough time to gather the final pieces of evidence I needed. Then I made 2 bank transfers, one to a newly established account under my maiden name, and another to a women's shelter that specialized in helping wealthy women escape abusive marriages. The amounts were small enough to avoid triggering David's financial alerts, but sufficient to provide immediate support when I needed it. Finally, I called Melissa, Eleanor's assistant, and invited her to lunch. I could use the company, I explained. With David in Zurich and the fundraiser approaching, I'm drowning in details. Melissa agreed readily. Our lunches had become a regular occurrence, a lonely assistant and a lonely wife, finding common ground in the shadows of powerful Vances. Over salads at an upscale bistro, I carefully steered the conversation toward the Novartis deal. David seems confident, I remarked. But Eleanor still has concerns? Melissa sighed, pushing arugula around her plate. She's been impossible this week, checking every detail of the contract, calling Zurich hourly for updates. She lowered her voice. She's particularly worried about the DBVN 42 disclosures. My pulse quickened. Oh? What kind of disclosures? Something about clinical trial protocols. Melissa shrugged. I don't understand the technical details, but there's a separate confidential appendix to the contract that only Eleanor and the legal team have seen. Not even David has full access. Exactly what I needed. Confirmation that Eleanor was deliberately keeping David in the dark about the clinical trial manipulations. That seems unusual, I commented, keeping my tone casual, especially if David is leading the negotiations. Eleanor doesn't fully trust him with the sensitive aspects, Melissa admitted. She says he's too idealistic, too bound by conventional ethics. She flushed, realizing what she'd revealed. I shouldn't be saying this. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. Your discretion is one of the things I admire about you, Melissa. This stays between us. I paused. Though I do worry about David going into these negotiations without all the information. Melissa bit her lip, conflict evident on her face. There's a copy of the appendix in Eleanor's private safe, in her home office. The one behind the Monet? I asked, recalling a glimpse of the hidden safe during a previous dinner party. Melissa nodded. She changes the combination monthly. Currently it's her late husband's birthday, 03-22-45. I committed the numbers to memory, hiding my excitement behind a sympathetic smile. That must be difficult for her, living with those memories. Eleanor doesn't live with memories, Melissa said, a rare note of bitterness in her voice. She uses them when they're useful to her, like mother, like son. By Friday morning, I had everything in place. My meeting at the U.S. Attorney's office was scheduled for 2 p.m. Eleanor would be at board meetings all day. The house staff had been given the afternoon off, a rare gesture of generosity on my part that had been received with surprised gratitude. At precisely noon, I entered Eleanor's Brookline estate, using the key David had given me for emergencies. The house was silent, the security system easily deactivated with the code I'd watched Eleanor enter countless times during Sunday dinners. The Monet hung innocently on the study wall, concealing what I hoped would be the final piece of evidence I needed. I swung the painting aside, revealing the sleek digital safe, 03-2245. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing folders, jewelry boxes, and a slim external hard drive. I located the Novartis file quickly, labeled simply N42 Protocol, in Eleanor's precise handwriting. Inside were exactly what I'd hoped for: the complete documentation of patient removals from the DBVN42 trials, including internal emails explicitly discussing how to conceal severe reactions from FDA reviewers. Most damning was a memo in Eleanor's own handwriting, directing the research team to sanitize the data before submission. I photographed everything, my hands shaking with adrenaline. This was it. Enough evidence to bring down Vance Pharmaceuticals and secure my freedom from David's abuse. As I carefully replaced the files and closed the safe, a voice came from the doorway. "I had a feeling you might try something like this." Eleanor stood there, elegant in a charcoal suit, her expression unreadable. My blood turned to ice. "Eleanor, I thought you were in meetings all day." Clearly. She entered the room, closing the door behind her. My security system alerts me when someone enters the house. I expected staff, perhaps, but not my daughter-in-law. I struggled to maintain my composure. David asked me to retrieve some documents for the Zurich negotiations. He forgot them. "David has everything he needs in Zurich," Eleanor replied coldly. "Try again, Sarah." Fight or flight instincts warred within me. I chose a third option: partial truth. "I know about DBVN42, I said quietly. "The falsified trial data. The patients who suffered, died, some of them, whose records were expunged." Eleanor didn't flinch. "Business necessities. The drug works for most patients. A few adverse reactions are statistically irrelevant. Not to the people who died," I countered. "Not to their families. And suddenly you care about strangers when you've been ignoring your own situation for years." Eleanor's gaze was piercing. "Don't pretend this is about ethics, Sarah. This is about leverage." She moved further into the room, her Louboutins clicking on the hardwood floor. "The question is, leverage for what? Money? A divorce settlement? What is your price?" "My freedom," I said simply. Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. "From David. His temper has gotten worse, hasn't it?" The casual acknowledgement, as if David's abuse were a minor character flaw rather than criminal violence, ignited something in me. "You knew," I whispered. "You've always known what he does to me." Eleanor shrugged elegantly. "David has his father's passions. Unfortunate, but manageable." "Manageable?" I echoed incredulously. "He fractured my skull. I could have died. But you didn't." Eleanor's voice was matter-of-fact. "You're stronger than you look, Sarah. It's why I approve the marriage. David needs someone who can withstand his intensity." The clinical detachment in her voice made my skin crawl. This wasn't just knowledge or acceptance. This was calculation. Eleanor had selected me as David's wife, knowing exactly what would happen to me. "You're monsters," I said softly. "Both of you." Eleanor smiled thinly. "We're survivors, Sarah. As are you, apparently." She gestured to my purse, where my phone contained the photographed evidence. "So, what happens now? You threaten to expose the company unless we let you walk away unscathed?" "Something like that. And if I refuse? If I call security right now, have them find that phone, delete those photos?" I met her gaze steadily. "Copies have already been sent to secure locations. If anything happens to me, they go directly to the FDA, the Department of Justice, and the Boston Globe." A bluff, but a calculated one. I did have a dead man switch email set up to send if I didn't enter a code every 24 hours, but it wouldn't trigger until tomorrow. Eleanor studied me for a long moment, then laughed, a genuine sound of surprise and what almost seemed like approval. Well played, Sarah. Perhaps you are a Vance after all. She moved to the bar cart in the corner of the study, pouring 2 fingers of scotch. So, your terms? I'd rehearsed this moment countless times in my mind, but actually stating my demands aloud felt surreal. I want a divorce, a fair settlement, nothing excessive, just enough to start over. And your guarantee that David will never come near me again. Eleanor sipped her scotch, considering. The divorce and settlement are manageable. The guarantee, she shrugged. David has his father's temper, but he also has his father's pride. He won't accept rejection gracefully. Then you'll need to convince him it's his idea, I replied. You're good at manipulation, Eleanor. Put it to constructive use for once. A smile flickered across her face. And the evidence? Stays secure as long as I stay safe. If anything happens to me, anything at all, it all comes out. Eleanor set down her glass. You realize what you're asking. If David discovers the truth, that you're blackmailing his mother, threatening the company, there's no guarantee I could control his response. The warning was clear, but I stood my ground. Then ensure he never discovers it. That's your problem, not mine. For a long moment, Eleanor was silent, calculating risks and outcomes as she'd done throughout her business career. One condition, she said finally. You give me until after the Novartis deal closes. 2 weeks. Then you get your divorce, your settlement, your fresh start. It was a reasonable request from a business perspective, but my safety was another matter. And in those 2 weeks, what about David? I'll send him to London immediately after Zurich. Regulatory meetings that can't be delegated. You'll have space to make your arrangements. I considered the offer. 2 weeks was manageable, especially with David overseas, and having Eleanor's cooperation, however self-interested, would make the extraction cleaner. Agreed, I said finally. But if David returns early, or if there's any indication he's discovered what's happening, the deal is void. The evidence goes public immediately. Eleanor nodded once, decisive. Then we have an understanding. She extended her hand. A business transaction completed. I hesitated before shaking it, remembering all the Sunday dinners, the galas, the carefully orchestrated appearances of family unity. 3 years of fear and pain under Eleanor's watchful, knowing eyes. Why did you choose me for him? I asked, the question that had haunted me since realizing she'd known what David was capable of. Why me specifically? Eleanor's expression softened slightly, not with warmth, but with something like professional respect. Because you're a survivor, Sarah. I recognized it the moment David introduced us. The careful way you observe before speaking, the perfect adaptability. Those aren't traits of a debutante from Beacon Hill. Those are traits of someone who's learned to navigate dangerous waters from a young age. She wasn't wrong. My carefully constructed backstory had obscured a childhood of poverty and instability, of learning to read moods and avoid triggers, of becoming whatever people needed me to be in order to survive. I thought you'd manage him, Eleanor continued. Balance him. Most women would have broken long ago. But you adapted. You endured. You planned. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I underestimated your ambition, however. That was careless of me. This isn't ambition. I corrected her. This is survival. Eleanor inclined her head, acknowledging the distinction. As I said, we're not so different, you and I. But we were, fundamentally, irrevocably different. Eleanor had built her life on power and control, sacrificing others, including her own son, warped by her expectations, to maintain her empire. I had simply wanted to survive, to find safety, to build a life free from fear. 2 weeks, I repeated, releasing her hand. Then I'm gone. 2 weeks, Eleanor confirmed. Make your arrangements quietly. I'll handle David. As I left Eleanor's house for the last time, a strange sense of lightness filled me. Not freedom, not yet, but the promise of it, the path forward. I canceled my meeting at the U.S. Attorney's office. The evidence would remain my insurance policy, not my weapon, at least for now. Eleanor would keep her word out of self-interest, if nothing else. The Novartis deal was too important to risk. David called that evening from Zurich, jubilant about the negotiations. The contract is nearly finalized. Even Mother will be impressed with the terms I've secured. That's wonderful, I replied. The familiar pattern of supportive wife responses automatic after years of practice. You've worked so hard for this. I'm thinking we should celebrate when I return. Perhaps that trip to Bali we've discussed. Bali. Isolated villas. Staff trained for discretion. No witnesses if his passions flared. The suggestion sent a chill through me. Actually, I said carefully, Eleanor mentioned you might need to go directly to London after Zurich. Something about regulatory approvals? A pause. She hasn't mentioned that to me. She just called this afternoon. Said it was coming up last minute but couldn't be delegated. I'm sure she'll brief you tomorrow. Another pause. Longer this time. I see. Well, if Mother insists. The edge in his voice was familiar. Frustration at Eleanor's control, but resignation to her authority. Will you be all right if I'm gone longer? Of course, I assured him. The fundraiser will keep me busy, and afterward I can focus on my recovery. Dr. Chen says rest is still important. Dr. Chen again, David muttered. You spend a lot of time with her lately. I kept my voice light. She's been helpful with my recovery, and she's brought valuable connections to the fundraiser committee. Just be careful what you share with her, David warned. Medical professionals can be nosy. The family's privacy is paramount. The family. Always the family. I understand, I replied. Safe travels. I love you. The words, once genuine, now part of the performance. Love you too, David responded automatically. I'll call tomorrow. After hanging up, I sat in our perfectly appointed living room, looking at the trappings of the life I'd endured for 3 years. The designer furniture, the original artwork, the photographs of David and me at galas and charity events, smiling the practiced smiles of people playing roles. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, until I could walk away from all of it. The luxury, the status, the fear. I touched my temple where the surgical scar was healing, remembering Dr. Chen's warning. The next time, you might not make it to the hospital. There wouldn't be a next time. I'd made sure of that. Eleanor was right about one thing. I was a survivor. But survival wasn't enough anymore. I wanted more than to just exist in the spaces between David's rage. I wanted to live. In my purse, the evidence that would bring down Vance Pharmaceuticals remained secure. My insurance policy against betrayal. In my desk drawer, the business card for the women's shelter waited for the moment I could finally use it. 2 weeks. 14 days until freedom. I could endure anything for 14 more days. 12 days later, I stood in the small apartment I'd rented under my maiden name, unpacking the few possessions I'd smuggled out of the Beacon Hill mansion. Nothing valuable or recognizable, just clothes without designer labels, personal mementos from before my marriage, and enough cash to sustain me until the divorce settlement came through. Eleanor had kept her word. David had gone directly from Zurich to London, his frustration evident in our brief phone conversations, but his suspicion not yet aroused. The Novartis deal was scheduled to close tomorrow, after which Eleanor would implement the plan we'd devised. A careful narrative of mutual decision, irreconcilable differences, David's need to focus on his new role at the company. My phone rang. Eleanor's private number, used only for our carefully encrypted communications about the extraction plan. Yes? I answered. It's done, Eleanor said without preamble. The Novartis board voted to approve the acquisition this morning. Ahead of schedule. Relief washed through me. And our arrangement? Stands as agreed. I've had the divorce papers prepared. David will be informed tomorrow that your separation is a condition of his accelerated promotion to CEO, the position he'd craved for so long, the ultimate leverage. Eleanor had found the one thing David wanted more than me, more than his pride, power. And the settlement? Being transferred as we speak. Offshore account, untraceable, as discussed. I closed my eyes, hardly daring to believe it was real. Thank you. Don't thank me, Sarah, Eleanor replied coldly. This is business, not kindness. You had leverage and you used it effectively. I can respect that, if nothing else. And the evidence? She asked after a pause. Remains secure, I assured her. As long as I remain safe and the terms of our agreement are honored, it stays buried. Eleanor was silent for a moment. You know, under different circumstances, you could have made a formidable Vance. The comparison might once have flattered me. Now it turned my stomach. Goodbye, Eleanor. I ended the call, looking around the modest apartment that represented my new beginning. No marble countertops or designer furnishings, but also no fear, no walking on eggshells, no hidden bruises. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. Checking in. Are you safe? I smiled, typing back, yes. Finally. Outside, Boston continued its busy rhythm, oblivious to the small victory happening in an unremarkable apartment building. To the world, tomorrow would bring news of a pharmaceutical merger, perhaps a society divorce in the coming weeks. Business as usual. But for me, it was the first day of a new life. A life without bruises, without lies, without fear. I opened the window, letting the spring air fill the room. For the first time in 3 years, I took a deep breath without pain, physical or emotional. I was free, and I would never be silent again.